Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's try that again. Sorry, good morning. That was operator error on this end of things. So it's great to be celebrating just this season of Advent together, of this expectation of the gospel, the good news of the person of Jesus, and that's awesome. As Luke mentioned in the announcements, we are streaming only on the 26th, but we do have a couple of tools for families and for adults just to be able to engage a little bit better at home. So we have some packets put together for kids, so parents, those will be on the table in the back. But also, if you find yourself like me when you're kind of engaging with a video message that is really easy to check out, I have some, and maybe you're thinking, well, it's that way in person too. But we have some notes put together for you, and you can go grab those. They are also in a back table just outside the back door, so you can have that on the 26th as you're streaming from home. And so those will be available to you. You can grab one today, and they will be available on Christmas Eve as well. If you miss it today, you can always grab it on the 24th. And Luke is right, Christmas Eve always comes on the 24th. It's weird how that works. So we would love to have you join us and invite somebody along, maybe somebody you've been praying for, somebody that just needs the good news that who you are created to be is not a problem. It's not garbage, it's not trash, and that's what this whole series has been about. We've been looking at the person of Jesus as he becomes human. And what does that mean for us in our own humanity? What does it mean for humanity in general that Jesus himself, God put on flesh? Well, I kind of joked about it previously, but I've mentioned before that I might be a little bit emotionally constipated. And my wife hates it when I say that. But yeah, so the reality is, the truth is, I'm not actually void of emotion. I actually did think I was at one time, and I went to a counselor for it, and we talked it out, and I thought, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit numb, I need to go get some help, and so I went to the counselor, and he was going through all these questions, and what we really arrived at was not that I didn't feel emotion. It was that I felt emotion, but I was actually afraid of emotion. I wasn't afraid to have feelings. I did have those. What I was afraid of is I was afraid those feelings and that emotion would actually overrun me. The truth is I feel a lot, but I don't give into those feelings all the time because I'm afraid to be controlled by my emotion. Emotions are weird like that. They have an incredible power over us because any thought that you think, anything that you do, it's emotionally driven whether we like it or not. And we usually fall into one of two camps if we're on the extreme ends. On the one extreme side, you have people like me who might try to push those emotions down, and then there's people on the other end of things that they can't do anything if it's not driven by emotion. We've seen a number of different reactions emotively over the last couple of years. I'm kind of referring to them now as pandemic emotion. The pandemic has done a crazy thing to our emotions. It's dysregulated us. It's dysregulated our emotions, and what it's done, the ultimate result of a dysregulated emotion, especially during this season, is now not only am I in control, or am I under the control of my emotions, but I want you to be under the control of my emotions as well. And so now not only am I dysregulated by my emotions, but now I'm asking you to be regulated by my emotions. And we've seen a lot of that over the last 2 years. It's been my personal observation anyway, that as we look around, it's like my emotions govern me, and now I want you to be governed by my emotions. And the same could be true for you, that you maybe have lost a little bit of control of your emotions and you're asking me to be regulated by your emotions. But even if we look beyond the last 2 years, we're at a unique moment in history where never before has our emotions had such a massive play in who we are as human beings. And not always for the best. In fact, our emotions, when they get away from us, and when we submit to the power of our emotions, it can change everything that we are. You can see it reflected as people see a gap between what they feel and what their appearance is, and so they adapt what their appearance to their feelings. Because we want to match. The problem is, emotions make a horrible master. They do make a good servant, but they make a horrible master. So how do we, in our humanity, redeem and gain control over our emotions? How do we find that bit of humanity in these feelings? Well, I want to encourage us that if we really want to know, we need to look at the person Jesus. The true and better human shows us how to live in full human emotion. I want to ask you to turn first with me to Luke chapter 22. We're going to be reading just a few verses out of Luke chapter 22, and if you find it a little bit challenging this morning, it's okay if you find it a little bit challenging, let me say it that way. We're going to be hopping around a little bit in the Bible, and so if you're not able to find every passage, that's okay. We're going to be going to 4 different passages as we look at humanity and emotions and how Jesus interacted with his emotions. Again, I want to start in Luke chapter 22, but I want you to hold on to this. As we're reading through each of these passages, I want you to press in a little bit farther, maybe than we have in the church in the past. You see, the message I've always heard about emotions and Jesus is that Jesus had emotions. Well, that's true, right? That's absolutely true. But I want you to press in farther with me than just Jesus had emotions. And I want to ask you to look at what Jesus did with those emotions. Because I think that is the key for us this morning. What did Jesus do with his emotions, and how did he interact with them? Again, we will be starting at verse 41. He, Jesus, withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, his disciples, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. So we have Jesus. He's pulled back. He's moments before his betrayal. He's with his closest followers, and he's praying. He goes about a stone's throw away from the 12. Well, really at this point from the 11, because Judas has already gone out to betray him. So he's with 11 of his closest followers, and he goes about a stone's throw away, and he kneels down and prays. And his prayer is, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me." Jesus is praying about this cup, this metaphor that so often represents the wrath of God or pain and suffering. For Jesus, this is a combined metaphor. It's both of those things. Jesus knows what is coming to him. And he uses a common metaphor of the cup, something that you have to drink, something that you have to partake in. And he knows that this cup is representing this pain and suffering. Jesus knew what was ahead of him. We've been talking over the last couple weeks about Jesus being fully God and fully man. And so in Jesus's fully manness, his full sense of humanity, he knows what is ahead. He knows that pain and suffering is ahead. The simple human fact here that we see in Jesus is he is not looking forward to this. In fact, he responds in his humanity and he says, "If you are willing, take it from me. If there is any other way to go about this, Father, let's do it that way." I mean, how many of us would not follow in Jesus' steps in this scenario and say, "Lord, if there's any other way outside of suffering for your will to be accomplished, let's do it that way." I would imagine Jesus is feeling so many emotions in this moment, beyond what we're given in verse 44. After his prayer, and at the end of his prayer, Jesus says, "But not my will, yours be done." Then we see an angel from heaven coming and strengthening him, and then a description about the culmination of Jesus' feelings. Whatever he's feeling in there, it's described as anguish. Anguish, this emotional pain. Now, pain is always both an emotional thing and sometimes ultimately a physical thing, and maybe it's from the outside in or the inside out, but we're noting from Jesus that his pain is primarily emotional. And I don't know about you, but like if you talk to any good athlete, they will say there's this moment of pain in training or in competition that they have to push through, and the only way to get through that pain, that anguish, is through mental toughness. Now, I'm certainly no professional athlete. I'm not even an amateur athlete. But when I exercise, I hit that wall probably much earlier than the average person. And I hit that moment of anguish, and it is so easy for me in those moments to just back away and say, you know what, we're not doing any more sets. I'm done here. This is way too hard. You see, the reality for most of us is in the midst of these moments of anguish, it's easy to be controlled by those feelings. Whether it's anguish and emotional pain as Jesus is feeling, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's all of those things, our initial response is to just shut down and stop the suffering. Our bodies have a unique reaction to pain and suffering. It's get away. That's not Jesus' reaction. We're being told that he's feeling all these things. It's being described as anguish, yet his response to Jesus is, yet not my will, but yours be done. Jesus is not controlled by his emotions. Instead, he submits his emotions, his feelings, his desires, even his will, to the will of the Father. And he continues to pray earnestly. Even in the midst of anguish, he hits that emotional pain wall, and he keeps on going. Let's go to another passage. We're going to flip over just to one chapter more, Luke 23, verses 32 through 34, excuse me. Two other men, both criminals, were also led out to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. We see here Jesus' obedience in his humanity all the way to the point of death. He knew this was coming. We were just with him in the garden. It was just being prayed for, and now we have Jesus in this moment filled with physical pain, emotional pain, turmoil. I would imagine Jesus at this point is feeling abandoned because he is crucified with two criminals, not his friends. Nobody went to the cross with Jesus. In fact, he was denied before going to the cross. So I would imagine it's completely acceptable to believe or to assume that Jesus is feeling rejected. Not only by his friends, but maybe even for a moment by his Father. In fact, later and in other accounts of this moment in time, we see Jesus crying out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus is feeling a lot right now. In the midst of all that he's feeling, he's probably also feeling an incredible amount of anger. You see, it's Jesus being the full human, the true and better person. He is going to have every single emotion, every single reaction possible that you and I have in these instances. And when you have just been mistreated, which is a severe understatement at this point for Jesus. You have been beaten, you have been whipped, and you have been pierced, and you have been hung up on a piece of wood. My natural response, and likely your natural response, would be seething anger toward those that accomplished this, those that did this to you, the perpetrators of injustice. We would be angry. It's safe to assume Jesus felt all of these things. Yet he didn't sin. It would have been well within Jesus' rights to be up on the cross, and as the culminating moment of Jesus' anguish and pain and hurt and rejection and all of this, if that were me up there, I'd be saying, you guys just wait. You're going to see it. 3 days later, you're in trouble. You're going to see that you were wrong. You're going to see that I was right. I'm going to show you. Right? It would have been well within Jesus' rights, and instead of speaking what Jesus does, he could have spoken a curse over people. He could have spoken whatever he wanted to, and we would have seen that as justified, but he doesn't. Instead, Jesus looks at everyone, looks at the people who crucified him, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even in the midst of these intense feelings, this moment filled with incredible emotion, Jesus looks at the heart of the Father, the will of God, and he speaks forgiveness to the people. Let's go to one more passage, Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. If you're unfamiliar with what the good news of the kingdom is, it's most accurately represented in the work and ministry of Jesus. You look at what Jesus did in the Gospels, and that is the kingdom of God. Jesus is the central intersection between heaven and earth, and that is what Jesus is referring to. So if you need a good definition of the kingdom of God, it's the person and work of Jesus. So Jesus is proclaiming the good news about himself, and he's in the midst of these villages and synagogues, and he's healing every disease and sickness. And when he sees the crowd, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." I love this phrase, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. He was filled with compassion. The Greek actually translates into words that actually talk about Jesus's bowels. It's actually translated more directly as yearning bowels. Right? Not this heart central point that we oftentimes have, but Jesus is feeling from the depths of who he is. It's in that innermost point. Have you ever felt like your stomach is in knots? I think that's the better description of what Jesus is feeling here when he talks about compassion. Jesus looks around, and it says that he sees the people, and they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. Harassed and helpless, why? Because he looks around and he looks at the sickness, he looks at the pain, he looks at the oppression of humanity, and he says, this is not how it's supposed to be. And in the center point of himself, of his body, of his physical being, he is in knots. He has a yearning in his bowels for something different. And it drives him into healing. It drives him into further expression of the kingdom. And it drives him to exclaim to his disciples, ask God to send workers into the fields, into the harvest. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask God to send out his workers. He sees them. He has compassion on them. He's twisted up inside because things are not how they should be. Now, Jesus could be driven to societal change if he wanted to be. I mean, that seems to be our go-to, right? If something's wrong, let's change a system. That's not what Jesus does. Jesus could have seen the injustices, and he could have blamed Rome, and he could have said, listen, you are not caring for your citizens very well. There are people out here who cannot care for themselves. There are people out here with mental illness, and there are people out here with all of these things. Jesus could have started pointing the finger and saying, listen, you guys need to take care of your people. You are not caring for them well. He could have started blaming and accusing everybody and anybody, but he doesn't. Jesus looks at them. He is filled with compassion, and he says, we need to be moved to take care of this. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The good news of God is here, and it is freedom for the captives. It is sight for the blind. It is released to the oppressed, and that's what he does. He is moved by this twisted up stomach to do something. We see that in this. Jesus could have accused out of his emotion. He would have done what all of us might have done, and that is start accusing people or looking for the systemic issues. But Jesus looks right at the people and he says, no, I will fix this now. Jesus' emotions don't rule him. Jesus' emotions are used to point him toward the work of God. And he tells his disciples, listen, we have to ask the Father to send out more workers to do the things I'm doing. This actually has a couple implications for us. One that we'll talk about in just a little while, that our emotions actually serve the work of God when they are fully redeemed, when they are set in their right order, when they aren't controlling us. We can stop blaming and accusing, and we can start being a part of God's redemptive purpose in the world. And the second part of that is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to do the things that Jesus did. Jesus asked the disciples, pray to God and ask him to send more workers to do the things we are doing, to do the things I am doing. That's what our emotions in the right view, our true human emotions, can do if we can grab hold of them. If they can serve us and serve God rather than us serving them. But that is a tall order, isn't it? It is a very difficult thing to look at our emotions and look at this entire world that sometimes, maybe even oftentimes, seems like we are at the mercy of our emotions. This entire world inside of us that we seem to have no control over. In outbursts of anger, in anxiety, in frustration, in sadness, in depression, in all of these things, we could look at those feelings and feel like we are a slave to those things. But Jesus shows us the way. He shows us there is a different way to be human, a different way to live, that we don't have to be in subjection to those emotions. In fact, Jesus even teaches on the key to how we can make that happen. You see, we don't just flip a switch and decide, you know what? I'm now no longer going to be a slave to my emotions. I'm going to be in control of my emotions. We don't just go there. We have to go through a process. And Jesus actually gives us what that process is. If we go over to Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12, starting at verse 29. Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And this was a common question that people would ask teachers of the law. What is the greatest command that we can follow? And Jesus responds, the most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Jesus gives us the key to regulating our emotions. To no longer be enslaved to them, but now to let them serve us as the good servant that they are. Again, emotions are a horrible master. They are a tremendous servant. And Jesus starts with, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Jesus is quoting an incredibly popular Jewish passage known as the Shema. It comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 6. And it was often quoted, but Jesus points to this one thing. And the Shema starts out with the oneness of God, which is key for what we're about to read, because we like to take the next following phrase that Jesus gives us, and we like to parse it out and make it something that it's not intended to be. We need to remember that Jesus starts out quoting, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And then he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. Jesus gives us a list. And in doing so, he gives us the key to understanding our emotions. Now, what Jesus is referring to is he's referring to a list, and he's breaking it down. But the truth is, Jesus is referring to the whole self. And we're going to walk through these words really quickly, but I want you to hold on to something. Jesus is not giving us pieces of ourselves that we can segment and that they can operate independently from one another. Jesus is referring to the whole self. In our scientific understanding of things, we want to get into the words like heart and soul and mind and strength. And we want to start believing it as these dual or multiple aspects of ourselves that can survive on their own, but they can't. That's actually dualistic in our understanding of the self, but we are not dualists. We serve a God who is one. That's why it's so important to hold on to that oneness of God, because as the Lord is one, we were created in his image, and we are not multiple parts. We are one. We may be able to describe them in different aspects and functions, but we are one person, and that's incredibly important to note. Jesus starts out with, love the Lord with all your heart. In Hebrew, this would have been the word leb, and in Greek, it is cardia. Either way, it gets to the same thing. The heart was believed to be the seat of the will and emotions. It's that place from which we choose. It's the place from which we are motivated. It may have been synonymous for them with the yearning bowels, the twisted stomach, the compassionate place of the person. This place that moves us to action. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all of that, your will and emotions. Next, Jesus goes on to, with all of your soul. We oftentimes like to separate this into something else that is eternal. It's the eternal part of us, right? I have kind of bad news for us. The only eternal being is God. You were not a disembodied soul before you brought on flesh. And for eternity beyond, you will not be a disembodied soul apart from flesh. There is only one eternal. There is only one spirit. We are not meant to be disembodied people. The soul is not a different part of us, but it is a different descriptor of us. The soul, in essence, is your essence. It is the central point of who you are. It's what makes you you. We might talk about this in terms of personality or persona. The soul is what makes you you. It's the essence of you. In Greek, it's psyche. It's what makes you you. It's the central point of you. Jesus continues on saying, love the Lord with your heart, your will and emotions, your soul with what makes you you, and with your mind. The mind encompasses thoughts, imagination, and disposition. It's exactly what we would think it is, just like strength. Strength is not a deeper word than it is. It's just your ability, your power, your strength. Jesus looks at all of these things, and it's interesting to me that in all of these things there is an incredible amount of overlap, and the overlapping piece of all of these things is emotion. Emotion is tied to the heart. Emotion is tied to the soul. Emotion is tied to the mind. It's very hard to think a thought without having an emotion tied to it, isn't it? And then even when we think of our strength, even when we think about our bodies and what animates them, we oftentimes respond to emotion. What is the classic terminology for our response in danger? We have two responses. Fight or flight, yes, thank you. Fight or flight. You can't feel fear without having a bodily reaction. So even though it might not seem in our strength that Jesus is giving us emotive words, what he is giving us is this thing that is governed by emotion. There is emotion dripping throughout this, and not just in one part of us. It's not like we can just segment our emotions, because we are not a segmented thing. You cannot segment your strength and have strength independent of you. You cannot have your body be independent of you. You cannot be independent of you. You cannot segment the mind and have it be some independent entity. That is not possible. It is all a whole, just as God is a whole. You and I are one. And we are permeated with emotion. So how did Jesus, the true and better human, how did he avoid the pitfalls of being governed by his emotions? His answer is to love the Lord your God. Love the Lord your God. Love him with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. All of these things that are permeated with emotion, let them love God. And in turn, that will shape who you are. It will shape every aspect. Your whole self will begin to submit to the love of God. And when that is in place, Jesus adds one more thing to it. If you also want to be regulated in your emotions, make sure you're not just loving God. You have to be, in the outpouring of the love of God in you, you have to be loving others. Love is that central point that ultimately is the origin point of our emotions, but also the ending point of our emotions. It is the boundary of all things us. Here's what I think Jesus is ultimately telling us. Your emotions are truly human when they begin in the love of God. Your emotions are truly human when they begin in the love of God. That is how we become more than maybe what we feel like now. That is how we escape this trap of emotions. You know, it's interesting that Jesus is speaking at a time where Stoicism is on the rise. Now, Stoicism is the, worldview that says if we could just escape emotions, then we'll be okay. Emotions are the taskmaster. They are the brokenness in the world. And if we can be free of our emotions, if we could have essentially no emotion, we'll be better off. But that's not what Jesus says. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus was not a stoic. Jason, is there anything else I need to be doing? Okay. We're just going to continue on as if there it is. We're going to be continuing on as if I'm doing nothing wrong. Okay. So the Stoics thought that if you could just escape emotion, you've got it going on. That is the ultimate path to salvation. But Jesus says, no, even in your emotion, we don't escape it. We don't try to transcend it. We submit it. We submit it to the love of God. If we can do that, that is the beginning point of true human emotion. That is the end point of true human emotion. That is everything. As Dallas Willard comments on this concept, he says, does Christ commend the famous apathy of the Stoic or the Buddhist elimination of desire? Far from it. The issue is not just feeling or desire, but right feeling or desire, or being controlled by feeling or desire. Willard points us to a truth. The answer can't be getting rid of all emotion or fully giving into our emotion. It's not about not having feeling or having too much feeling. It's about having the right feeling, the right desire. It's about finding that place where we are no longer controlled by our desire, no longer controlled by our emotions. And Willard points us in this direction, that if God made your emotions, he has a purpose for your emotions. Your emotions and my emotions, they are not inherently good or inherently bad. They can be misplaced, but they can also be properly placed. Jesus says that proper placement of our emotions is in the love of God. I'd encourage you as you go back, there are so many other places that you can find emotions from Jesus. In John 11, Jesus is filled with sadness and weeps at the death of his friend Lazarus. In John 8, 1 through 11, Jesus again shows compassion. In John 19, 25 through 27, Jesus shows empathy. The truth is, as you look at Jesus, you can find the full range of the human experience, but not just that he has the full range of human emotion. You can see that Jesus is not a slave to his emotion, and because he, the true and better human, is not a slave to his emotion, you and I can learn to live in the pattern of Jesus, even in our thoughts, feelings, and desires. So how do we do that? You and I can be free from human emotion, in this sense of being controlled by it, if we can ask God to redeem our emotions. Seems like a simple step, but the first step in this is asking God to be redeemed in our human emotion. Again, God gave us our emotion, and they are best when God and his desires are the central point of our emotions. So we have to ask God to redeem our emotions. The first and most simple step of this is simply to talk to God about your feelings. I would say that God is the best therapist, hands down. And as one who felt the full range of human emotions, we can know that he can sympathize, he can empathize with us. He knows what it means, but we have to talk to him about our emotions. He can handle it. He can handle the honest truth about what you and I are feeling. And so the first step is simply to talk to God about our emotions. And sometimes we need to ask God to heal our emotions. There are places in us where our feelings and our desires, where our past has been so bruised and hurt. Maybe it was inflicted to us. Maybe it was something we took part in ourselves, but God is the healer even of emotions. And if we truly want to see this, we have to use the other tools that God has also given us to heal our emotions. Sometimes it's necessary for us to take the next step and to go into a licensed therapist for our emotions. Sometimes it's at that point that we need extra process, and you and I can't accomplish it on our own. We need a little bit of help, and we need the other tools God has given us. Counselors are incredible tools, so if you find yourself in that place where I've been talking to God about my emotions and I still need help, we need to go to licensed counselors and have them help us work those things out. I mentioned earlier that was one of the steps for me. Both Janine and I have tremendously benefited from the work of counselors in our lives. People that can help us navigate those feelings, those emotions, the issues of life, and come out on the other side a healthier, more regulated person. Another tool that we have in-house is we have something that we call prayer appointments. Prayer ministry, this inner healing prayer. We believe that God is the healer of our whole selves, any way that you want to talk about it. And we believe that if we bring those things in community to the Lord, he will touch them and he will heal them. He will use community to heal our emotions, to redeem them. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a prayer appointment is, it simply is what it sounds like. You make an appointment with us, and we will schedule a time to have a couple of people who love you and care about you sit down and pray with you. And while the length of time may vary, one of the things is common. It can look a number of different ways. Sometimes it looks like a few friends sitting down and praying and listening to the Holy Spirit on your behalf, to hear what God might want to say to you, to hear the truths and healing things that the Lord wants to bless you with, that you might receive that and that you might take steps forward in your healing. Sometimes it looks that way. Sometimes on the other end of the spectrum, it sounds a little bit more or looks a little bit more like dialogue and coaching, guided by the Holy Spirit to help you get unstuck in that next thing. We offer that here at church, and I'd encourage you to reach out if you want that for yourself. If you want help in redeeming your emotions, this is the primary foundational step. Redeeming our emotions. Ask God to redeem them. Secondly, in the life of Jesus, we see submission. You and I need to submit our emotions to Jesus. First, we redeem our emotions, ask God to redeem our emotions. Secondly, we submit our emotions to Jesus. Again, our emotions are not inherently good or inherently bad. They are a gift from God to be redeemed, and once they are redeemed, they are submitted, just like Jesus in the garden. Jesus in the garden said, "Not my will, but yours be done." He had his own feelings, he had his own emotions, but he ultimately submitted them to the Lord, and we, you and I, can do the same. The truth is, this is breaking the pattern, because most of us don't understand it. Maybe some of us have a hard time identifying it, but it's true for all of us. We all submit to something's lordship in our lives. Oftentimes, that is our own emotions. The good news of Jesus in submitting to Jesus is that you do not have to submit to the lordship of your emotions, but you can submit your emotions to the lordship of Jesus. I'll say that again. You do not have to submit to the lordship of your emotions, but you can submit your emotions to the lordship of Jesus. There is one God, one Lord. He is one, and he is over all. All things are to him and from him and through him. He sustains everything, even your whole self, even your emotions. And you and I, as part of the gospel, can submit our emotions to the lordship of Jesus. But that takes intentionality. It takes recognizing that emotion and saying, "Lord, I give you this." The Apostle Paul wrote that we take every thought captive to the word of the Lord. I would add on to that maybe just one nuance. Not a different meaning, but a nuance. That in our thinking, we also have emotions. And so we take every emotion captive to the authority of Christ. And then finally, once we've asked God to redeem our emotions and we submit our emotions to Jesus, then we can do what we see Jesus do as he is filled with compassion for others, and we can let our emotions submit to the work. Specifically, the work of Jesus. Let your emotions be submitted to the work of Jesus. You see, when our emotions are redeemed and they are submitted to Jesus, they can be an incredible signpost to the working of God and the inbreaking of the kingdom in the world around us. When our emotions are functioning the way God intended them to, they can be signals, they can be beacons for what God wants to do when he fills us with compassion. The point is not to accuse and rant and rail about everything that's wrong in the world. Maybe God is asking you in the emotions of your true self to step in and be his representative in the moment. In fact, even in the life of Jesus, there are a couple of places in the Gospels that it seems that emotion was the necessary ingredient to the healing. That as Jesus looked at the sick and the oppressed, that he was moved by compassion, and it was his compassion that moved him into the healing. You see, when our emotions are in the right place, when our emotions are submitted to the Lord, then they can also be servants of the work of the kingdom. That's what emotion looks like properly placed. They can be signals of God's desire in the motion. And then in those moments, we don't have to wonder what the will of God is, because he would look back at us and he would say, you have my mind, you have my thoughts, you have my feelings. How do you feel about this situation? And in that moment, we know we've crossed the threshold from being slaves to our emotions being slaves to the purpose of God in the world. That is what we see in the true and better human. That is what we see in the person of Jesus. Can you imagine not having no emotion at all, but being free from control in your emotions, being freed to have say over our emotions? Could you imagine what it would be like to interact with you if you weren't driven by your emotions? Sometimes I have to look at that. What is it like to be across the table from me? What if the person people encountered in you, sitting across from you, being opposite of you, with redeemed emotions, with emotions submitted to the lordship of Jesus, with emotions that now serve the work of Jesus in the world, what would it be like to sit across the table from you? What would be different? Who would people encounter? Who would you be in that space? That's who God's calling us to. That's the people that we want to be, not perfectly living this out, but starting in that direction. Can we at least just this morning start to change our trajectory on what it means to be human in our emotions? Let's start living into that. Let's pray.